Your Excellency, Archabbey, Grand Mufti, Deputy Prime Minister, President, dear guests. We have had a preliminary activity of foundation, and 2 years ago in Pannonhalma, we launched the Otto von Habsburg Foundation and its contemporary profile. Therefore, it's no coincidence that we chose this location. We wanted to take a start here from where our patron has taken spiritual and educational resource and where he has been put to the grave. And we needed the spirituality of his heritage in order to be able to cultivate his memory. And I would like to thank the Archabbey and the monastery for welcoming us with open arms and for helping us, assisting us, and for cooperating with us. In the past 2 years, our foundation has carried out a lot of work, and you can read up on that in our yearly report. We have made progress in respect of processing the relevant documents, in particular the Hungarian documents and photographs. Organizing this collection has been done through state-of-the-art technology in order to make them public as soon as possible and to show the public all these values that we have been entrusted with. In our conferences and tenders, we wanted to recall Otto von Habsburg and to contribute to public affairs, be it the values and situation of our continent or debates on our future. And of course, for all this, it was necessary that the Hungarian parliament and the government generously fund us, and we are very grateful for this. Although we cannot be completely satisfied, we can say that after 2 years, we can stand here with a good conscience and talk about our situation today and the situation of religious communities after commemorating Otto von Habsburg at the Holy Mass. And I would like to thank Archabbey and the Grand Mufti for being here today. And I'm really happy to say that the foundation, Otto von Habsburg, is in the forefront of the interest, not only here in Hungary, but also abroad. And a lot of people find that this collection is of value. All the documents related to the heir to the throne are very valuable, and I would like to ask all of you to spread the information about this collection. A lot of people are regarding our activities with a lot of attention and interest. Not only the activities of Otto von Habsburg in the 20th century is in the limelight, but also his spiritual heritage. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to wish all of us a fruitful discussion today. Thank you for being here and thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much, President of the Board of Trustees, for your words. We had a very small discussion with the Archabbey right now because he indicated that he's not only going to be holding a presentation, but also will be speaking some words of welcome. So now he will be welcoming you all. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, As host, I would like to welcome everyone warmly at this conference and commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the death of Otto von Habsburg. And I would like to warmly welcome our guest, Hussein Kazabovic, the Grand Mufti of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and those accompanying him, István Darvas, Chief Rabbi, the members of the family of Otto von Habsburg, Zsolt Semjén, Deputy Prime Minister, István Nagy, the President of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation Otto von Habsburg, and Gergely Prüle, who is the Director of the Foundation. It is an undoubtable fact that Otto von Habsburg has always strived in the European Parliament, but also on different international forums, to make it public that Hungary has an undoubtable place on the continent and its institutions and in the community of values of Europe. But what is the recognition that underlies this aspiration? Perhaps it is a vision for the future which feeds from the vision that is held by the monarchy for the future, namely that in the future we will not only have big kingdoms coming together, but there will be also smaller nations that will cooperate with each other on par in Europe. And it will be a system where the necessary reasonable decisions are forged. And then Europe will be operable. Today in Hungary, what we see is that peace, social stability cannot be achieved by solely focusing on political and economic interests. Perhaps, and we believe and we hope that there is an ever stronger desire to create a network based on values and ideals. And one of these networks is the network between the European monotheistic and Abrahamic religions. The contemporary spirit, however, seems to reinforce the spirit of opposition. Unfortunately, here in Pannonhalma, we try to contribute to the opposite through our own tools, through conferences, publications, personal contacts, trying to pull down walls and try to fight against religious intolerance and discrimination. We're trying to curb religious fundamentalism and to eliminate all forms of violence. And that is what we also pray for. Those who enter the monastery, they go through the gate, which is inscribed with Pax. All of you have entered through the gate of peace. And I wish all of us an efficient search for the right path and an efficient networking between the monotheistic and Abrahamic religions so that we find the proper modus vivendi in order to reinforce the stability and the peace between our societies. I am sure that this is worthy of the memory of Otto von Habsburg. Welcome. God bless you all. Thank you, Archabbey, for your precious words. It also allows me to draw the conclusion that it doesn't make sense to write speeches in advance because life will rewrite them, and I would like to continue where he has left off. Allow me now to start with the personal observation, which reflects back on what Mr. President has said. When 2 years ago we started to process the 400 crates of documents that were unorganized at the time, then we, based on the names and historical readings, we already grasp that there would be something of huge historical value that is happening here. However, the experience has showed us an experience that actually is gathered where you process articles about from Otto von Habsburg or his letters. Well, it shows you the interesting sides and awesomeness and Europeanness of a person that really goes beyond the politics of today. Well, this is an experience that we made at the time. It is hard to talk about this because who would want to direct an institution that they don't believe in? It would, of course, be curious to say that these documents are of no value, since I am here as a director of this foundation that I believe in deeply. But I still think that it's important to speak some private words about this work, because every day it is an extremely exciting intellectual work to get to know the documents, the letters, the articles from Otto von Habsburg. The plan for the conference today was also stemmed from these experiences that we made when working with these documents. We hear a lot about Christian Europe, and that the pan-European movement or even the European Parliament was an institution where Otto von Habsburg took part, and he, as a deeply religious Christian, has done a lot in order to contribute to the religious heritage of the continent. And looking back at de Gasperi, Adenauer, Schumann, and other founding fathers, he was thinking about what could be the value system that underlies European integration. And it would be a simplification to say that he was not thinking about all of this in a holistic way. He did look at this in a general, universal, holistic way. This approach was also reflected in who he was in contact with. These were people beyond the confines of the continent. These contacts went beyond royal families and their members. He looked at the world as a network of civilization where religions, cultures could cooperate and cohabit, and all of this cooperation will come together as world politics. Therefore, civilizational and religious processes are those which he participated in with great enthusiasm. And as a second point, I would like to say that the main message of the processing of the legacy of Otto von Habsburg is that the political thinking cannot be separated from civilizational connections that we always have to remember and recall. If we talk about greater connections, then we have to think about the civilizational relationships. A lot of people are concerned about the fate of Europe. I think it is with reason that we are concerned, but there are a lot of different arguments that flow into this debate, and there are a lot of superficial approaches. There's a lot of prejudice as well.
talking about prejudices, there are a lot of very quickly formulated, and actually intellectually these formulations are quite shallow, although they meet the requirements and expectations of diplomacy, but they actually result in misleading steps as opposed to developing and helping people grow spiritually, which would ultimately lead to value-centered Europe's formation. Well, here in Europe, we have a very special responsibility, and this is a responsibility in terms of civilization. Not only because, as we usually say, that here in Central Europe we actually can produce quite a high level of development as opposed to other parts of Europe, and not only because in terms of our choice of values we might be more consistent than others, but also due to the fact that the Central European heritage also actually bestows upon us quite a heavy set of responsibilities. And this is a kind of a civilizational responsibility, and actually this is part of the cohabitation of all those religious communities who are present right now with us. It is not just some kind of a monarchic nostalgia due to which we invited the chief mufti from Sarajevo and the chief rabbi, and also we are received by our archbishop here at this Christian site. This is not just some kind of inter religious dialogues, very romantic vision and implementation. Our goal here is that this set of roots of civilization we would like to strengthen and make it clear and transparent. Let us not forget that actually the Grand Mufti is the Muslim leader, religious leader in Europe, who is actually leading the only historical Muslim religious community here. He is not an immigrant religious leader, but in fact he is leading a community that goes back 500 years after the formulation of the Ottoman Empire, and it is operating on the Balkan Island. Now, as far as the role of Jewry in Europe is much more obvious and clear among us, but in this day and age, when we see how colorful and diverse the Jewish community is, and this renaissance of Jewish communities that actually has returned, and we witness that in Hungary, it actually demonstrates all the various directions that it takes the Jewish communities to. I believe that this is in itself a very interesting phenomenon. At the same time, the situation of the current situation of the Christian communities, and I'm very grateful for that experience going back yesterday, when after the arrival together with the Grand Mufti and his company, we discussed that topic, that is quite strange to them how I talk about the diversity of my Christian community. And actually, for somebody coming from a different civilizational environment representing another religion, it is actually quite interesting and in a way strange, just like it is for me when I listen to all the information coming from the Muslim community. So yes, I think it is very, very important that we in Central Europe would talk about this heritage. And now that we talk about the Abrahamian religions, let me quote Otto Habsburg's saying that quote that was mentioned in the dome, in St. Stephen Dome. That was the sacred text, and it was no coincidence that here we selected two sets of reading that the Archbishop already referred to, the chapter number 12 of the Book of Moses. That's what Schönbrunn Archbishop quoted. God told Abraham, go away from your land, go away from the house of your father to the land that I will show you. That was the first reading, and from that, Otto von Habsburg's whole life lifespan and life career was actually then developed and detailed, just like he had to leave his own original land, how he had to redefine himself, and from the lost political power he had developed a spiritual autonomy and intellectual force. It was a really beautiful parallel story, and at the same time it's no coincidence Abraham was part of that comparison, the ancient ancestor of those who believe in the same God. And the other thing, the other part actually goes back to the New Testament. It relates to what the Archbishop has already mentioned, and basically a learning that we have from Otto von Habsburg's life, searching for peace and preserving peace in such a diverse civilization. Because if we look at Matthew's evangelical quotes, those are happy who establish peace because they can be called the sons of God. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the very reason why this commemorational conference today chose this very topic. That is the reason why we originally thought that the very honorable representatives of the three world religions can share thoughts with us, with the help of which we can become even more acutely aware of our belonging together in this civilization. So now I would like to ask the Archbishop to take on the role of a participant after being a host, and take on the role of the representative of the representative of the world's Christianity. As a Protestant, I would like to ask you to please take on this role. Thank you very much for the lead up, and thank you very much for this request. Well, concerning Europe's civilizational network of roots, I would just like to add a few thoughts to this idea. Well, as far as my contribution is concerned, I would like to go back to the photographer of National Geographic and Ron Miller, who actually prepared a digital photo of the sun. The sun somehow is a symbol of our religious community, all of those organizations, and similarly to the foundation of Otto von Habsburg, any organization that wants to actually demonstrate values to the society, to the people. So the number of radiation, the number of rays that actually can access the earth, that maintain a life and helps warming up. But radiation is just a consequence, and as a result of the deeper workings of the processes. Sorry for this slide, but I happen to be a geography teacher. But actually, here we are talking about the hydrogen nuclear fusion. So here, helium nuclear cores are created. The real essence cannot be seen. It is underneath, and the surface is the radiation. Well, when we talk about the operation of communities, we do have some visible parts that we can see in the newspapers, but people quote that people actually pay attention to from and press a monitor. I actually downloaded all the news about Pannonhalma. Soon enough, we will have reports about this conference with your names. I'm going to add your name to the list as well, and I show this slide. And we can all create this crown of rays of all organizations. We could show all the visible parts that others mentioned with which they label us actually. However, in our case, similar to others, it only shows the surface. The essence is somewhere much deeper inside. When I showed this slide to my colleagues, they said that it rather looks like an egg, but I don't think it disturbs us ultimately to see the essence. So deep inside, that is our faith, our morality, and our values can be located. And we know it very well that this only remains ideology if all we do is talk about it. Even the most beautiful principles, the most sacred principles, can easily just seem ideology if we do do not represent those in an authentic manner. It is our task to continuously research what actually it means to have enlightenment that can be implemented in our day-to-day operation, day-to-day work. Let me show another slide. The early Christian church fathers use the images of the sun and the moon happily. The sun represents Christ, and the moon represents us people, because the moon does not have its own light. It only reflects the sun's light. Therefore, faith and morality and values, it is not our own invention. It only goes back to the revelation received by God. So it is the divine revelation, so we can only reflect it to others. Here we are talking about values, cultural values, and let me refer to Hans Joas from the Humboldt University of Berlin. He actually identifies seven. He's actually a professor of sociology of religion, and he actually highlights seven values. What he means by that is that values make us actually look at them and compare our desires to them. So we spontaneously, based on these values, try to develop our own lives. And when we think about our lives and when we reflect on on our life, and when we see that there are contradictory tendencies as opposed to our values, then all of a sudden our conscience actually tells something to us, and we start thinking as to how we could do it in a different way. For example, religious traditions as a value, these are diverse, but there is a common denominator that, in spite of all that, is something that everybody believes in, that there might be a transcendent sphere above the world, and the faith actually treats the world as an established reality. And we actually believe that whatever happens in the world is God's gift. We all believe that God turns towards us with love, and we also believe that conversion is very important. If the man actually adjusts himself to the loving God, then the capacity for loving frees up, and we are also hoping for eternal life. I believe that this is a common basis, common foundation of all the various religions, of all the Abrahamian religions. In the list of Hans Joas, it is quite exciting that the way he sees it, that there are other religious motives in terms of the other values as well. It doesn't just basically say that there are all the religious values and then there are all the other values that are profane and are not related to the religious values. For example, respecting or having high respect for day-to-day life. It might be strange that we actually list these among with the other European values, but it leads us back to the still life painting of the Dutch tradition. It says that they no longer actually show some sacred topics, but ham and happy people and grapes and a glass of wine. However, Eckhart Master, a philosopher, theologist from the Middle Ages, he says that turning towards the world, this type of activity can be regarded as a more valuable relationship to God, as opposed to the lifestyle that turns ourselves away from the world. And also, Salesi, Saint Francis, who talks about Philotel, the introduction to the devout life, he says that basically in terms of virtues, the most important ones are the ones that are connected to our profession, because actually for us what we have available are those minor occasions where we can take the necessary steps. So that's where with our day-to-day activities we can get closer to God. And talking about intimacy and all those stories about that here, going about Luke's evangelical history, here we have Maria and Martha, the two sisters, and also Jesus appearing there. Martha is busy cooking, and Maria is sitting by the feet of Jesus and listens to the Master. And according to Jesus' words, she was the one who actually chose the better option. So yes, there is a little bit of a familial conflict, but it's a very intimate situation, and also self-realization as a task. Ultimately, what is behind that all is actually fulfilling our godly mission, and also accepting rationality and diversity. Behind that, actually, we have the entitlement, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. I believe it is very, very important to consider Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti and cyclic approach, where actually he calls everybody to love that actually overarches the geographical boundaries, overarches the racial issues or differences among people. And here it leads us to the three most important starting points of Christian anthropology. The first one is dignity. In other words, we are all creations of God, and we are all people, and that's what gives us our dignity. And according to that, we are all actually pictures of God embodied, and that's why God actually provided value and wealth, and actually it's the rights and the obligations, they all go back to that type of dignity. And if we are aware of that God-given dignity, then when it comes to responsibility, in addition to exercising these types of rights, all the obligations actually grow up to that level, even in a case of doing without the major morality, rights and obligations separate. Actually,
the liberal perception of civil constitutionality says that the exercise of fundamental rights cannot be separated from duties and their enforcement because rights are recognized, meanwhile, duties are created by law. I would like to turn this around. I would say that all of this would be the harmony coming from the mission of living in dignity. So all of these duties and rights will be in harmony if we look at our lives as a mission. I would like to now turn to the spirituality of Saint Benedict, and he speaks of four ancient monastic virtues. That is something that he recalls when he is organizing the life of a monastic community and speaks of the regulations of this community. The first such virtue is obedience. It is a difficult task today to bring obedience as a topic closer to people because the everyday person thinks that when he's obedient to his boss or superior, then he is giving up a part of himself. But if we look at our spirit, then it actually means an openness towards cooperation. It means that we're not just deciding on the path of our life alone, but it means that we have an abbot and the monks around us, and we take decisions together, and we're open to having them co-decide our path. If we're looking at a family or another group of people, then we can reinterpret this kind of obedience for these communities. And a second ancient monastic virtue in the list of Saint Benedict is humility. Well, we have an even deeper problem with humility because we think about humiliation, which is not a positive idea, a sense of the word. And we can say that, in contrast, humility is not something negative. The humble person is someone who knows himself and has no inclination to overcompensate due to a sense of inferiority. This person is present in this point in his life where he has been taken by God, be it his family or his place of work. And the third ancient monastic virtue is zeal. It's a beautiful word. Contrasting or the opposite of the zeal is not laziness, because Saint Benedict says that the opposite would be a bitter soul who is overzealous, trying to humiliate the other. And today, what we would call a positive type of zeal is to be open to the tasks ahead, to be present in my life, to think about how we can make things better, how we could act more credibly and go deeper. And the fourth ancient monastic virtue is silence, and the role of silence, the respect for silence in our life. It's very important to sometimes take a step back from the situation that we're faced with, take a step back from all the noise, to stop and to think and to reflect on what is happening, and to listen to the other person and to reflect on the situation that we're in. We sometimes say that we can't see the forest from the tree. Uh, this is a situation where we have to take a step back, take a breath, and to rethink the situation. Besides these European civilizational roots, I really wanted to mention these four ancient monastic virtues because I think these reflect the Benedictine spirituality that we live today. And I would also like to recall the proposal made by Stefan Wilkanowicz, who is a Polish journalist, and he made this proposal to the European Constitution's preamble. And he wasn't really successful with this proposal, but it was a very important proposal because it says the following: We Europeans, aware of the richness of our heritage, drawing from the wealth of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Greek philosophy, Roman law, and humanism, with both religious and non-religious roots, aware of the values of Christian civilization, with a basic source, which is the basic source of our identity, aware of the frequent betrayals of these values by both Christians and non-Christians, aware of the good and the evil that we have spread
A
to
másik
the
lehetősége
inhabitants
valójában
of other
életében ez a
continents,
pozitív és negatív
bemoaning
irányba
the social
elmezdíthető
catastrophe
élményekkel.
caused by the
Sajnálattal
totalitarian
belsőségben,
systems
a
that have
kulturánknak hatalmi
originated within
totalitárius
our
rendszerek
civilization.
számlájára
We would
írott
like to build a
katasztrófákat
common future.
akarunk
I think
építeni
that
közös jövőnkkel.
the common
Úgy
future
gondolom,
of Europe
hogy
is to
Európa
reflect
közös
upon
jövője, a
the
múlttal való
past, to
szembenézés,
think
a
hard
elkövetett
about the omissions
mulasztások,
that we
hibákkal való
committed, the
szembenézés,
mistakes that we had
abból
committed,
levont
but in a
következtetés,
way
hogy valami
also
módon
to build
mégiscsak
on the
a
civilizational
civilizációs
cultural roots
gyökereknek,
and to put these
kulturális
into the
gyökereknek
forefront.
a
And this is
előtérbe
how
helyetése,
uh,
fölmutatásában
we can
válik
look
igazán
into the future and enrich
támogatossá és
our common path.
számonkérhetővé
Thank you very much
sosem.
for
Köszönöm
your
szépen
attention.
megtisztelő figyelmüket.
Thank you very much, Archabbey, for your important words. I would like to indicate at this point in time, if we still have time at the end of the conference, we will be sitting out here as panelists. We won't be able to deflect from the question, where do we stand today in respect of all of these issues in Europe? But until that, we have quite a few presentations. The next speaker will be Hussein Kavazovic, who is the Grand Mufti of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Allow me to say a few words about him to supplement what I have already said in the beginning. He is the spiritual leader of a community which 25, 30 years ago suffered a great tragedy during the Balkan Wars. Not only one, but many tragedies, in fact. And the historical European community, Muslim community, fate has touched every Christian and humanist. Suffice to refer to the genocide in Srebrenica and the massacre that took place there. The fate of this community and the leader of this community can really draw conclusions and teach lessons and can be a role model for many of us. This community and this leader have traditionally refrained from making any extreme statements. Grand Mufti Kavazovic has turned to his Muslim brothers and sisters historically, asking them not to talk about revenge and making clear that those who had been the members of the group who committed the massacre are not an entire nation, but a group of extreme Serb Chetniks who committed this genocide. And I think this wisdom and this sobriety is something that is characteristic of the European Islam and that has to prevail in the European Islam. And it is very important for the Bosnian Islam community. It is important that we have a strong connection and relationship with this community, and therefore it is a great honor for us that Grand Mufti is here today with us. Dear Excellencies, dear Eminences, dear guests, I am grateful for the invitation to address the 10th anniversary of the death of Otto von Habsburg. I'm really grateful for this invitation. I have been asked to commemorate the last Austro-Hungarian emperor, the son of the last Austro-Hungarian emperor. He was a great friend of Bosnia and Herzegovina and also an honorary citizen of Sarajevo. Otto von Habsburg was a true European who respected the diversity of Europe. He was an advocate of the European Union and an opponent of Nazism and communism as well, and a man who was responsible largely for the fall of the Iron Curtain and the end of communism as well. We are grateful that he advocated for an independent Bosnia and Herzegovina, and especially appreciated the Islamic traditions of Bosniaks and Bosnian Muslims. In a conversation on German radio in 1998, he made it clear that Islam was considered dangerous only by those European Christians who did not know it, and stressed that Islam was not a threat. Moreover, he praised the Bosnian Muslims because, as he said, it is easy to come to an agreement with them and that they are not a problem. Otto von Habsburg visited Sarajevo in 2004 despite threats that he would be assassinated as his cousin Franz Ferdinand in 1914. If it had not been for the assassination of that fatal 28th of June in 1914, many believe, there would have been no Yugoslavia or war and no genocide in the period from 1992 to 95, and Bosnia and Herzegovina may already be a member of the European Union today. Of course, not everything was perfect in the Austro-Hungarian Monarchy. Of course, the Habsburgs benefit from the area they ruled. But it is still clear that most of the inhabitants of those areas where the monarchy once was have fond memories of those times. The City Hall and the Faculty of Islamic Sciences, these are architectural jewels from the Austro-Hungarian period. And the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina are proud of this era and these architectural jewels. Not only roads, railways, and other public institutions were built, but also the population experienced full respect for both its cultural and religious customs. While Muslims were expelled or forcibly baptized in neighboring countries in the late 19th century in Austro-Hungary, they were a respected part of the population. Perhaps this is especially true for the Muslim population, for whom this monarchy was at first a Christian occupying power. But this occupying power very quickly realized that, like any other religious community, they can be respected. This loyalty of Bosnian Muslims came to the fore during the First World War, when it was the Bosnian regiment which was considered to be one of the bravest units. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to being a guest in Hungary today after 5 years. Then, back in 2016, as now in 2021, I accepted this invitation and I was aware of the fact of the honor bestowed upon me.
The Islamic identity of Bosnian Muslims is founded and shaped in the tradition of the Hanafi madhab within the Turkish cultural zone of Islam, and with Bosnian specifics, the Hanafi madhab is considered to be the most flexible school of law in Islam, and it traditionally determines the institutions of faith and religious practice of Bosnian Muslims. Bosnian Muslims have always nurtured an open, cheerful, and tolerant Islamic vision of the world and life, while at the same time being steadfast in adhering to the fundamental religious teachings of Islam. From the Ottoman Turks, they accepted many cultural forms and practical expressions of faith. Thus, as an important feature of the Turkish cultural zone of Islam quickly took hold in Bosnia, and in the times that followed constantly gathered supporters of the spiritual path and the path of love. At the same time, Bosnian Muslims maintained their pre-Islamic Bosnian customs that were not in conflict with the principles and values of Islam, and incorporated elements of the Bosnian style into the universal forms and contents of Islamic life. Typical examples are Bosnian Dovista, the sites of annual religious gatherings of Bosniaks according to the solar calendar, and the original architectural style of the Bosnian mosque. In the Islamic tradition of Bosniaks, in its mainstream Islamic life, in the unity of ideals and reality, doing good and encouraging good, delving into the righteous sides of life. In the prevailing religious sentiment and understanding of Bosnian Muslims, which the ulama and educated Muslims share with simple believers of humble education, women as well as men, Islam represents religious truths, institutions, and rituals, but also all that is good and beautiful. A good Muslim man is a good father, son, brother, neighbor, a man who does his job conscientiously and responsibly. In turn, a good Muslim woman is a good mother, daughter, sister, neighbor, a woman who is responsible in her work. The basic religious duties of Muslims, prayer, Ramadan fasting, zakat, and hajj, are not duties that are easy to perform. However, an individual can be very zealous in carrying them out, but if he is not convincing in the honest work he does, if he is not good for his environment, he is not considered a good, true Muslim. By embracing the Islam as their religion, Bosniaks, Muslims maintained and to some extent strengthened their allegiance to the country of Bosnia and their native Bosnian language. Although they were subjects of the Ottoman Empire for more than 4 centuries, they did not become ethnic Turks. Quite the opposite, just as they had a very clear religious awareness of themselves as Muslims in relation to Catholics and the Orthodox believers with whom they shared language and origins, so they had a very clear ethnic awareness of themselves as Bosniaks and in relation to Turks, Albanians, Arabs, and others with whom they shared an affiliation with Islam. With the arrival of Austro-Hungary, Bosniaks became aware of both their traditional Muslim and Bosnian determinations and their determinations with the new civilizational reality and tradition of modern Europe. Bosniak intellectuals saw the possibilities of a fruitful encounter primarily in the Muslim adoption of scientific achievements of the West on the basis of the original Islamic affirmation of the value of knowledge, but also in connecting to the Islamic value of justice and modern European political institutions. Over time, the idea of a possible mediating role of Bosnian Muslims between the civilizations of East and West was based on this universalist interpretation of the two worlds. During the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina was established in a modern organizational form. Prior to that, actually, we can say that the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina was established in modern organizational form, and prior to that, Bosnian Muslims were included in the religious legal system of the Ottoman Empire, which, with the Sultan as Caliph, represented the Ummah or the universal community of Muslims. Although its members are mostly Bosniaks, and although its institutions are inseparable from the historical destiny of the Bosniak people, the Islamic community is not perceived as an ethnic community in it. People meet as Muslims and share a community that looks beyond racial, ethnic, or class differences. At the end of the 20th century, Bosniaks, together with most of their fellow citizens of other religions and ethnic backgrounds, voted in a referendum for an independent Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was their vote for Europe and real democracy, for human rights and freedom, for an open worldview and political pluralism. Representatives of the institutions of of the international community have previously convinced them that this is an authoritative act of European democratic procedure and that it will ensure their entry into the European community of free peoples. Unfortunately, Bosniaks paid gravely for their first free expression of commitment to the idea and reality of Europe. They were victims of the most serious crimes committed in Europe after the Second World War, victims of genocide of Srebrenica and serious war crimes in other parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In a few days, that is, everybody we remember everybody will remember the civilian victims of the genocide committed in Srebrenica. Bosnian Muslims share a living space with members of Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Judaism in an area where one religion has never completely suppressed others or had complete dominance over the customs and lives of the population. Therefore, interreligious dialogue is very important for coexistence and lasting peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As we live in a plural world, we are faced with the constant challenge of questioning the rules that govern our relationships, their grounding in the values we stand for, but also the permanence of the sources on which they rest. One of the issues is the question of religion and its truth contained in the religious sources from whom traditions followed by millions of people originated. Every holy book in the hands of man is republished text that speaks to its reader. It is also that complete autonomy of religion that is not possible in relation to other forms of organizations which are based on other spheres of spirit with which it encounters. Recognition of the right of others to a collective religion and the cultural identity has always been one of the most important issues which determined the possibility or impossibility of living together as people. Members of great religious and heirs to their traditions in their teachings and practices built and demolished bridges between people. For Muslims, Islam is a kind of a way of life, a spiritual path by which they understand themselves and the world around them. It is a belief that commands them to do good and to avoid evil, but also to oppose it when it exceeds the limits of what is permissible. Islam is not a closed world that does not recognize the right of others to exist to happiness and dignity. As has always been the case, and as the holy books warn, the world is proving complex and complicated in relation to the world we might want. There are many people and many races, religious affiliations who at the same time claim the right to their own spiritual path, as the Quran testifies. If God had willed, He would have made you one
o čemu
people.
svjedoči i Kur'an.
The sources of Islam clearly and unequivocally speak of one of the fundamental rights, the right to recognition of the other, of the different. Every religious text is at the same time the text of an ideal, imagined world. It is almost always imbued with the need for idealized perfection, which strives to present a harmonious, unquestionable image of the world, wrapping it in a cloak of its own holiness. Between the sublime ideal set by the religious text and reality is a balanced community of people to which the Quran itself draws attention to in a way. In the 29th verse of Surah Kaf, he says, and say, the truth comes from your Lord, so whoever wants, let him believe, and whoever wants, let him not believe. And in the 99th verse of Surah Humus, it says, "If your Lord willed, there would indeed be only believers on earth. So why do you force people to be believers?" A good deed, as Muslim rationalists believed, would benefit both a Muslim and a non Muslim on the day of judgment, invoking the Quranic verse which reads, "Not all the same." There are followers of the earlier revelation who read and pray the book of God all night. They believe in God and in that world and ask that good deeds be done, and they turn away from the wicked and can hardly wait to do charity. They are honest, whatever good deed they do, they will be rewarded for it. Allah knows well those who fear Him. At the same time, the Quran speaks of the image of this world as it is by nature. The human root is common. He creates you from one man to live on earth and to be buried in it. It is quite clear to which the Quran also points that God, by creating the human soul into which he breathed his spirit, created the pluralistic soul of the world and maintains it as such to this day. What is required of us and what seems difficult to us is the recognition of the right of another to a spiritual path that is one and at the same time different for each. The Quran speaks of the followers of the earlier revelation in a doctrinal sense with full respect and esteem for their dignity. Thus, we find that the Quran calls the followers of the book, as they are referred to, a common word which should be understood as a call to the essence of the faith. Afterwards, the Quran states that everyone can remain in their religious tradition. To you is your religion, and to me is my religion. The Quran legitimizes the path of other religious communities. Uh, those who believe be they Jews, Christians, and Sabians, those who believe in Allah and the hereafter and do good deeds, indeed, a reward awaits them from their Lord. They will not be afraid of anything and will not grieve for anything. The Quran advocates what we could define as the autonomy of each of the three Abrahamic communities. We have prescribed law and direction for all of you, and if God willed, He would make you followers of one faith. But He wants to test you in what He prescribes for you, so compete to see who will do more good. You will return to God, and He will inform you in what you have differed. Confirmation of the recognition and autonomy that the Quran advocates in relation to the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities are also these Quran words. We have revealed the Torah. In which there is instruction and light. According to him, the Jews were judged by the prophets who were obedient and honorable people to Allah, and the learned who were required to keep the book of Allah. Let the followers of the Injil, the Gospel New Testament, judge among themselves as God revealed to them in it. Although Muslim champions and rulers, as well as champions and rulers in others, did not always adhere to the ideal enshrined in the Quran. The Quran text points to the extreme need for tolerance toward the people of earlier revelations. In the political and legal systems built by Muslims over time, followers of earlier revelations, Jews and Christians, enjoyed a kind of religious judicial autonomy as evidenced by historically established facts. In addition to insisting on respect for freedom of conscience and autonomy in personal legal matters, as we have already pointed out, the Quran obliges to oppose those who would violently destroy other people's places of worship, churches, synagogues, or mosques, in which as the Quran says, God's name is written. The history of Islamic countries and chronicles of Muslim rulers tell us of many examples in which the exercise of public functions in public administration is entrusted to Jews, Christians, and others for reasons of state and public interest. Unfortunately, people's religious practices are not always in proportion to what is written in the holy books, whether they are Muslims, Christians, Jews, or others. We saw this in the example of the aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina in the period from 1992 to 1995, and we still see with our own eyes how entire religious groups of Christians, Yazidis, and Muslims are disappearing in Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Myanmar, Yemen, and other countries. History testifies to us again and again that the most destructive for people are the spiritual walls and the rise between them. And they are raised by everyone: politicians, historians, nationalists, theologians, racists, and others. Millions of innocent people fell under their walls. Why is the recognition of the other and his right to profess religion and rights so difficult and tragic for members of monotheistic religions? Shouldn't we all be taught the biblical Quranic narration about Habil and Kabil, or Abel and Cain? God wanted to make their right different, as well as the ways of our religious practice and ethnicity, so that we could get to know each other better. If we want to remain faithful to the vow written in our holy books, we will have to understand the right to choose beliefs and differences in rites, cultures, and traditions as God's will and the wealth of mankind, and repeat this to our followers more often. There is an inherent and centuries old Maital religious microcosm in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is evidenced by many historical sources. The culture of interreligious coexistence consists primarily of Muslims, Orthodox, Catholics, and Jews. The spirit of tolerance is nurtured by all religions in our region. This is not a coincidence. It is not exaggeration that Sarajevo is labeled a European Jerusalem. The Ottoman Empire preserved the plural society in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Avdana, a document of Sultan Mehmed, faith issued to the Franciscan Catholics, was the guarantee of the freedom of their religion and property. Expelled Sephardic Jews during the Reconquista in Spain found refuge in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the early 16th century. During Austro-Hungary, Ashkenazi Jews settled in Bosnia. Recently, the Islamic and Jewish communities marked the Sarajevo Purim, an event that testifies to the civic courage of Bosnian Muslims who saved their Jewish neighbors from the arbitrariness of the Ottoman envoy. During the Second World War, a number of resolutions were adopted, signed by Bosniak leaders, theologians, intellectuals, and businessmen against violence, murders, and persecution of Jews and Orthodox. We are proud that Yad Vashem and the Alley of Righteous bears the name of Bosnian Muslims. The Haggadah, a valuable book on the history and customs of Sephardic Jews, was saved in the World War II and in the past war by the courage and commitment of Bosniaks. Thank God we have a number of examples of helping the restoring neighbors during the aggression, such as Srđan Aleksić, who was killed in Trebinje when he tried to save his friend Nedeljko Galić from Ljubuski, who saved detainees in a concentration camp with false documents, and Abdullah Nakas, a hero in white, a surgeon from Sarajevo, who performed more than 15,000 surgeries, regardless of the religion and ethnic affiliation of the patients, and many other similar examples.
You have signed an agreement on cooperation with the Jewish community. It is based on the principles of justice, peace, coexistence, and human rights. We also work closely with other churches and religious communities. The Islamic community has signed an agreement with the Council of all Protestant churches based in Switzerland. At this occasion, I would like to remember and commemorate Cardinal Schönborn. Cardinal Schönborn led the 2011 burial ceremony of Otto von Habsburg. We in Bosnia and Herzegovina were honored by his visit in 2016 when he stated that dialogue has no alternative. His Eminence, Pope Francis, sent a similar message during his visit to the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2015. He supported the work of the Interreligious Council and said that that interreligious dialogue is the obligation of every believer to preserve peace, brotherhood, and friendship. It is therefore important that we strive to talk about what we have in common and that these are values and faith in God. Moral human values are universal values at the same time, such as preserving peace, the freedom of each individual, respecting the other, fighting poverty and injustice, helping the elderly, the infirm, and the poor, and preserving the harmony that God has established in the world. Today, we are witnessing climate change. We believers are obliged before God to preserve the created nature and environment around us and to treat all living beings, humans and animals alike, with dignity. We can also have an interreligious dialogue on issues of social environment. We share the tradition of nurturing neighborly relations, dedication to work and prayer, fasting customs, and devotion to one's faith, religious community, state, and the law. And the states of Hungary and Austria, as well as the members of the European Union, have preserved peace and contributed to stability and progress. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Otto von Habsburg once emphasized the benefits of EU enlargement for peace, stability, security, and prosperity. He believed that the more Europe moved its borders to the east, the more secure its center and the west would be. Even then, he was aware of the influence of the superpowers from the east. We are aware of these influences in the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that is why we have opted for the integration of our country into the European Union. Today, Bosnia and Herzegovina is waiting to be accepted by the European Union. We hope for a new bearer of the European idea, an idea advocated by the late Otto von Habsburg. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Grand Mufti, for your words. I think we can all agree in saying that we wish him all the best and great strength for his moderation that he radiates towards his community and the entire continent. Otto von Habsburg has a great book called The Reichsidee, which is uh, a book looking back at the history of his family, but also it draws conclusions and lessons from those ideas that can be transferred from the Austro-Hungarian monarchy to the European Union. And it has a closing chapter where he discusses the global religions, Christians, Judaism, Islam, and the conclusion he draws is that we are living in an ever more material world or materialistic world where these three religions should come closer together and to cooperate as much as possible. And I think this is something that echoes the words of the Grand Mufti. He also wrote a lot about Judaism as a historian, primarily because among his forefathers, to suffice to mention Karl V, well, in the organization of the administration of the kingdom, Jewish people played an important role. So he not only discussed the issues of the history of Judaism from the perspective of religion, but also from the organizational structure of the monarchy. This is a very interesting topic and part of his work and legacy. Today we're really far from this, but I can say that Judaism is an important pillar of the continent and also an important pillar of the Hungarian religious community. And therefore, I'm very happy that Chief Rabbi István Darvas is also here. He was a student of Arpad who was ordained a rabbi in 2015, and he is the secretary of the Hungarian Rabbi School, and we are happy to welcome him today. Dear Excellencies and Eminencies, Archabbey, Chief Grand Mufti, and Deputy Prime Minister, when I was invited, I was scared to think about not being able to refrain from talking about football, because every single time I held a lecture in the past, I always talked about football, and when the conference approached, I was sure that we will be talking about football today as well, but in a strange sense, though. But before delving into the issue of football, I would like to recall an important figure of Judaism, Moses, who had an interesting career between his 80s and 120, which is an important part of everyone's life. Well, when he came to this part of his life, he prayed to God and asked for two things. He wanted that God allows him to see the promised land, but also to enter the promised land. And God tells him, go up and look at the promised land, but you cannot enter it. Is this glass half full or glass half empty, since only 50% of his desires were fulfilled? And the 40 years of his most important part of his life was devoted to accompanying his people to the promised land. He could not be a part of it, but at least he saw it. And Judaism draws the conclusion, which is true for Christianity and Islam as well. Through prayer, 50% of our desires can be fulfilled. The other half is something that we have to work for, but if we are successful in our prayers, at least half of them will be answered. I think as a basis, we can say that's fine. Those who went to church last week or to the synagogue or the minaret, well, and also those who did not go to church, well, we would like to ask them to come in greater numbers. But those who did go last week faced a challenge because they were imbued with a lot of news. And even though we may think that we cannot be touched by these news, it is true for the faithful and those who are atheists. Well, we're somehow influenced by them. Let me mention one of these new pieces of news, but before I do this, let me talk about the number 24. In hermeneutics in Judaism, 24, the number 24 has special importance. The first thing that would come to mind for a Jewish person is that 24 is the number of books that Tanakh is made up of, the sacred book, or if we think about those priests serving at the time, they had to sacrifice this many things in their life. So 24 is an integral part of the Jewish tradition. Last week, a lot of Jewish people coming to the synagogue encountered number 24 quite a few times because the Copa America, which is a Latin American football game, well, this was played this week, and it actually occurred that there is no number 24 in the numbering of the players in the teams. And some people would not actually think about this, and a lot of people would not notice this, but there are some who do notice this and call their friends, and they try to think about what the reason for this could be, and then they recognize that in Brazil, in the LGBTQ community, 24, the number 24, is important in the gay community. So the result or the conclusion is that in the Brazilian team, there's no 24 because the Football League wants to try to give a statement by omitting number 24. And this could be in the end of the story, but we live in a world where this actually ripples through, and a French reporter or journalist comes to the conclusion that this is the case, and the German news agency reads this French report and asks the Brazilians why number 24 does not play in the team, and this question is then reported in every language around the world. The thing is, when Moses looked at the Promised Land, he didn't see one thing, and that was environmental pollution. At the time, there were no people to pollute, but he did see a lot of things, such as spiritual pollution, which was to which was that people were believing in false gods. And in our days, when people come to the synagogue or they don't come, and we want them to come to the synagogue, and that they come here with full hearts to pray and to learn values, well, one of the biggest obstacles of them coming to the synagogue is this spiritual pollution. The news that I referred to, well, everyone could bring analogies and similar pieces of news that would resemble this, where Christians and Jews are faced with spiritual pollution. But how can we protect ourselves from it and protect others from this? We want to set values, and we want to set boundaries. When the tide of the sea is rolling in, then it is difficult, of course, to set these boundaries. And what has been already said today, and I agree, is that the only thing or the only way forward is to cooperate. And a basis for this cooperation or the underlying idea could be something that I really like and I'm really committed to it, just as to football. Well, it is that we have to think about what the highest form of commitment could be between people. I think this is loving the other even though we do not agree with him. I don't think there's anything better or higher in love than being able to be close to the other without agreeing with this person. But if we do not agree, we know that there will be disputes, and it is then important that love keeps discussions within confines where the people participating in the dialogue are led into a positive direction. If we think about Hungary or Europe and the vision for its future, only such a loving dialogue can bring us forward. And I think this is something that Otto von Habsburg also desired, that we have a Europe or a Hungary where life is diverse. However, diversity should not mean that certain questions would have cannot be discussed, that we have to remain silent about these. No, we can discuss these issues, but we should not want to eliminate the other. We have to turn to each other with openness, with interest, and with the common desire that we build a livable future and country for ourselves.
The last century had an excellent Jewish master, not only in the Jewish but in the Muslim culture. He was very well versed. He was called Ignaz Goldziher, and what he talked about was where the possible place of the church could be the Jews in the modern world. He said the following: actually, with the jury, it's not such an archaeological question that we are going to deal with, that basically currently we are not in connection with, but we are not going to take it as a kind of a historical grace. It would just be sentimentality, and that wouldn't have any content. It's not antiquity, it's not a reliquia, but when we consider it as a living texture, a living organism that we play a role in, that we are part of, which is not only our science, it is actually our life. It is not the inventory of the past, but it's an atmosphere in which we breathe and which we exist. We don't look back on the past as the biblical Lot's wife, so that we will be frozen as statues. We rather would like to draw conclusions from development as far as the present is concerned, and what is even more important for the future as well. And then he continues his thoughts by saying, so in one word, as long as we see some religious life somewhere, we are witnessing development, and as soon as we don't have that, it's no longer a living texture, but it's rather mummies that are covered with balm. And yes, we can have some romantic desire towards that, but we cannot say about that that it is living, that it actually lives, and that it has to do something in real life. What Goldziher said actually, and he said it 115 years ago, it's absolutely current today, and not only for Jews, but for Christians and for Muslims as well. We have to try to find a key as to how we can address the world, to the non-religious part of the world, or to the world that has a different religion, so that we could, and that is typical of all the monotheistic religions, that we should actually represent such values that actually leads to a better quality of life in the end. But according to the Jewish chronology, 300 and 333 years ago, such an event occurred that still defines the path of the world, and that's when the Torah was handed over. That was the kind of annunciation. When that happened, God did not consider one thing, what the needs are, because if there was a kind of a survey, if there was a committee that would have surveyed the needs of the world, if you just think of the Ten Commandments, there were quite a few rules which we wouldn't have received a lot of likes for God, but still, God's idea at that time was that he would like to target above the level of the needs and desires. It is a very unpopular thought. Thanks to the Archbishop, we already talked about humility and being actually obeying. Yes, of course, these are unpopular things. And yes, God started out with these unpopular steps, whereby he set the level of expectations much higher than the needs were there for. It's no coincidence, actually, that after that, the members of the jury actually had to wander around for 40 years. And Maimonides, who is the chronicler of the time, says that the human nature is not such that it would learn from servitude and laying bricks. Our ancient ancestors spent 40 years in the desert, and then a nation was created which is not used to being slaves. And actually, we don't even have 40 years that passed by. But I would like to actually call your attention to some parallel aspects here in Hungary for the last period. We are wandering around, really, we Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and we actually depend on each other in a sense, and we can only take over God's message if we do it with a joint effort. If this joint will is missing, if this joint will, which is based on maybe some loving misunderstanding, if we don't have that common basis, then our strength will be cut into pieces. In Hebrew, this concept is called halacha. They call it a right for religion. So this is the path to be followed. And when God handed over Torah to the jury, he didn't mention certain parts in the Torah. For example, how to do business, how to get married. It wasn't there, but halacha actually talks about everything. However, with regard to the fact that these halaic requirements are not explicitly mentioned in the Torah, that's why something evolved there, and it is going on since then. The Jews debated with one another. If you actually read the news these days, you simply cannot imagine that there possibly could be any debates among Jews. But yes, there were some debates at the time. And after passing over the face of being very shocked by this news, the first debate was actually done between two men and their schools. And that's about all the wisdom that we received from God, how possibly we can translate it to practice. So from the godly outflow, how can we actually practice it in real life? One gentleman was called Hillel, the other one was called Shammai. The representatives of the two schools, as I mentioned, this is the loving misunderstanding. That's how they were relating to each other. And for 3 years, they were convincing one another what should be the path to follow in case of individual issues. 3 years is quite a long time. And at the end of the 3 years, they were exactly at the same point where they were when they started out. They didn't know what the common path should be. Actually, there was a rare event that is quite rare for the last 2,000 years. So this calling said that halacha should be as it is. We could be quite grateful for such a voice from above, but it seems that temporarily we don't have this voice from above. But at that time, once that message was there and it said who should be followed, then the wise people asked, all right, it's fine. If both of these are the words of God, then why should Hillel be followed? But it's part of Jewish nature that they always ask just one more question than what people like to listen to. So there was this question, and then the answer was created, and the answer was the following. Well, the reason is that Hillel and his followers are humble, have humility. And all right, so there are times when an empty phrase can conclude long-standing problems. It sounds quite like that. Okay, they are humble, but we are all humble. And then Talmud explains what type of humility they actually keep in mind. The idea is that Hillels keep the minority opinions as well. They don't just say according to whom that law exists, but Shammai, who remained in minority and whom we are not following, even his opinion is preserved as well. Just think about it for a moment. If we could actually evolve our debate culture the same way in the 21st century, where the debate would not all be about reasoning and justifications and being louder than the other and proving their own rights. If that person could pay attention to the other person's ideas and opinions, it is really different and could mean the start of a nice new world if these types of debates would be multifold in the world. So this decision was created, and actually the halakha system got created, and more the Jewish communities end up in a situation. They are not unique representatives of mankind in that sense, that from time to time somehow love runs short. So love runs short, and in cases like that, the conflicts are somewhat stronger. However, Talmud also knows that Shammai's and Hillel's schools conflicts got stronger when there was a lack of expertise. As long as well-prepared, learned people were having discussions, the conflicts were not so extreme. But when they actually went down to a lower level, then the conflicts were much bloodier, both in the spiritual and in the physical sense of the word later on. Well, there was no such Jewish wise man who didn't know the third book of Moses, which says, love your fellow mate like yourself. And in spite of that, although nobody ever went against that message and never questioned the importance of that, in spite of knowing all this within the community, somehow basically emotions ran wild. We have to somehow understand that when God actually issued that very difficult commandment, love your fellow mate like yourself. Well, at that time, we can have some guesses what this was about. Those who have very safe and reliable sources rather look for a doctor. But let us just think for a moment, what could God have thought about at that time? If I look around here, I'm 100% sure that statistically only 5% of people are capable of equally loving all your fellows. And I think we are a majority where we do like some of our fellows more than others, and we actually like others less, and there might be others whom we don't like at all. But God never asks for tasks that are completely impossible to perform, because God really tries to come up with requirements that basically we can actually perform. So the wise man actually try to translate it so that people would understand. So Hillel actually said that this beautiful sentence, love yourself as your fellow mate, it does have a very practical interpretation. So whatever is hateful for you, please don't do it for unto others. So actually, there's very little poetry, very little heartfelt emotion is there. Isn't that much more beautiful to say, oh, just love each other? It is a much nicer thought as opposed to just having this very lean statement that whatever you hate about others doing it to you, don't do it to others. So my prayer for years actually has been sent out to achieve this as a minimal set of requirements in Europe, all basically all over the world, among Jews and non-Jews as well. Because if we reach that stage, it would mean a major quantum leap, a quality leap. And here we have another very serious barrier. And I mentioned that, I touched upon that, the number of likes and dislikes. Well, during the past few years, a very interesting phenomenon is that when we share our opinion about something, quite often we do it in a very simple set of coordinates without even wanting to go deeper, because we have to react to news very quickly, very fast. So I just quickly like or dislike something. So just imagine something that somebody is standing up there on the Mount of Sinai, listens to the Ten Commandments. Yes, okay, so I'm the everlasting God, don't have other gods. Okay, then I dislike that. I don't want to have just one God. So this whole likes and dislikes coordinate system, we have to step over that. And churches do have this possibility whereby they can suggest that when it comes to real serious things, one can only come up with a relevant opinion if, as opposed to this very fast liking and disliking, one spends much more time and goes into much deeper thinking processes, because sharing your opinion and having a freedom to share your opinion can be a trap. It's a kind of a trap which does not require expertise so much. And when everybody can have the illusion that they can comment on everything because they are expert of everything, no problem with that. However, people very often actually overstep their boundaries. And once that starts happening, actually thinking about the whole approach and the whole way of thinking, where we are connecting to the European way of thinking. And all that requires is that please read the 10,000 pages that you should read. Please be curious about what the other person is thinking. And it requires for you to be able to love or like people whom you will never ever agree with. And it also requires from you to not treat your religion as an antiquity or something coming from the past, but as a living organism. And once that happens, we can say that the dialogue that got started a long, long time ago, and where basically today is a very serious step, it achieves its ultimate goal, and the Abrahamian religions actually contribute to the idea that we have a better and more livable world. Thank you very much.
Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, köszönjük szépen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank István Darvas for his speech, and we would now start with the panel whose technical preliminaries had been started. Well, then we would fall into the simplified like-dislike trap that István Darvas has already mentioned. So I would like to continue this loving disagreement at lunch, and I would like to ask George Semjén, Deputy Prime Minister, to speak the closing words of the conference. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, the Royal Family, Archabbey, Chief Rabbi, Grand Mufti, President of the Board of Trustees, dear ladies and gentlemen and guests. I don't think I can compete with lunch, but I want to say that there was a very nice priest in our village, and he gave me a lifelong lesson. He said, Zsolti, there are two kinds of speeches in Holy Mass, a short one and a bad one. That is why I want to keep everything short. As my role of minister, I would like to draw some conclusions on the side of the Hungarian government and also as the president of the Christian Democratic Party. I would like to draw some conclusions also from my side. We are 10 years following the death of Otto von Habsburg, and I think 10 years are enough to draw the balance of somebody's life. And I think we cannot speak about Otto von Habsburg as merely a politician. Much rather, he's the ideal type of the royal family of Habsburg of Lotharingia, but he also personifies the history of Austro-Hungary. And therefore, from the perspective of the Hungarian state, what is important to note is that from the history of Austro-Hungary, we should place much rather to the forefront of our attention the history of this kingdom. Not only because if we look at Budapest and look at the parliament, the paved roads in Budapest, the buildings and our avenues, a great majority of our architectural values have been built during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but also because the defining experience of this country and Central Europe is, and we may be more PC about it, but that we are placed between two huge empires, the German and the Russian Empire, and the history of these peoples living in Central Europe has been ever-changing, but what was defining was that they were pressed in between the German and the Russian seas. And it was the monarchy that was capable of preserving these peoples without becoming the puppets of the German or the Russian empires. And it's also important to note that small peoples of Central Europe did have their national pride. It is worth thinking about Kossuth's idea of the Danube Nations Confederation. It was a utopia, it was a theory and a goal. However, the history of Austro-Hungary was a historical fact. The monarchy, its history and factuality was not a utopia. It wasn't fiction. It wasn't set at the drawing board, but was a reality which was forged in the womb of the centuries. And therefore, the past, the history of Austro-Hungary and its peoples, Czechs, Slovaks, Hungarians, etc., is also a history of a common mentality. Maybe it's worth going back to the Eastern articles of Deák, where he talks about the economy and whether the Czech Republic and Austria could survive without the Hungarian agriculture, whether Austria could survive without the Czech industry, and whether Austria can resist the German pressure and the Anschluss. And it should be also considered whether or not this group of states can remain without Austria. But what he drew as a lesson was that these peoples would become the puppets of the huge empires, and the Habsburg monarchy is a monarchy which can resist the German and Russian pressure through different ideologies and under different names and situations, but this was the geopolitical reality of the time, and that is why I say the history of Austro-Hungary was represented by the ideal type of Otto von Habsburg, and it also reflects the fact that this common mentality was such a value that was important at the time, but also something that we're exploiting today under the V4 grouping. And it laid the basis for the cooperation of small peoples within the framework of an empire which could resist both the German expansion to the east and the Russian expansion to the west. And I would like to note it was a much more stronger unity than today the European Union. Of course, I respect our Greek and other brothers and sisters, but I don't understand their associations, their allegories, their jokes. But I always understand the Croatians, the Slovaks, Czechs, because we come from the same cultural circle and from the same mentality. Therefore, the unity of the Central European small peoples is something that we should hang on to, because this helps us enforce our interests. Another thing that I want to say as a Christian democratic politician is that, for me, the most beautiful thing about the personality of Otto von Habsburg is that his political philosophy was in close contact with his personal life. He was a true believer, thanks also to the Benedictine monks and his education. He's a politician open to Europe, resonating with a Hungarian heart, and he was a good father as well. And therefore, Otto von Habsburg, when he speaks of the Judeo-Christian civilization and the European Christian civilization, and when he's writing and speaking of the diversity of Europe and Hungary's mission, and when he's talking about the role of the family in society, well, this is not only a political philosophy for him, but it was also the reality of his personal life. And that is why he is a classical Christian democratic politician in the sense of Adenauer, Schumann, and de Gasperi. On a personal note, a few days ago, I was at the summit of the European Christian Democratic Party, where we now are experiencing a special situation in the European political plane. And I have to say that even in our political party, we have a pressure coming from the mainstream. Our party imagines a progress in a post-Christian, non-religious form. There are no nations anymore, there are no sovereign nation states, but much rather we will have a European federation or federal state where there are no families, but there's a gender ideology, which is maintained by European technocrats. It's difficult to solve this conundrum, but I think the political legacy of Otto von Habsburg reinforces the classical Christian democracy in Europe. Christian legacy is a historical fact. We have the Judeo-Christian ethics, Roman law, ancient Greek moral thinking, but this is all a part of the Christian civilization. Everyone has his personal belief, he has his personal experience and relationship with God, and we live this through our community of believers. But the civilizational unity that is forged in this personal experience is the identity of the EU. And Otto von Habsburg never questioned Christianity, and I think this is why the experience of the monarchy was important for us, or the royal family. Think about Joseph II, who was thinking about the complete entire monarchy as such. That is why the reconciliation in 1861 was so important, because we need a Central European unity, such as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it is also important that we recognize the sovereignty of the nation states. That's why we reconciled in 1867, and that is why Hungary reconciled with Croatia a year later. And it was also important to reconcile. It would have been important to reconcile with the Czechs, etc., and other nations. And I think this is key because the nationhood as a value has to be recognized and should be recognized as it is a truly Christian value. God has not only given us heaven as a holy land, but has also given us on earth our nations as a home. Every nation is a singular, unprecedented fact, and only this way can we contribute to the world. Czechs can contribute their Czech nature, Slovaks their Slovak nature, and Hungarians their Hungarian nature to this experience of the world. And culturally, we would be much poorer if any of these nations would disappear. And therefore, Christianity means that we have to reject two extreme political views. And Otto von Habsburg also draws attention to it. This internationalism is one of the extremes that we have to avoid, meaning that we deny the importance of nations. Why? Because every single nation is singular and cannot be repeated. The other extreme view that has to be rejected is when a nation denies the right to the existence of other nations. This could be called chauvinism. Christianity, Judaism also teaches that every nation is singular and unprecedented, and therefore Christianity rejects internationalism and chauvinism, which denies the right to sovereignty of other nations. And therefore, it was a beautiful symbol when Otto von Habsburg took on the citizenship of Hungary and Croatia, and that he spoke the languages of these nations. This is how he expressed the necessity of the unity of Central European states, as was the case at the time of Austro-Hungary. And he also expressed the right of these nations to exist and their duty to preserve their diversity and cultures. And third, what is also interesting that I have to note as a minister is that it was important in respect of the foundation of Otto von Habsburg that the Hungarian state fund a museum or an institution, but an important agreement was signed between two entities, the Hungarian state on the one hand and the Habsburg royal family on the other. So we signed an agreement on the values that Gergely Pröhle has already detailed. Well, these values and these relics will be kept and organized in Budapest. And it is not only a museum as such or a research center as such, but much rather it was founded on the basis of a treaty between the Habsburg royal family and the Hungarian state.
And I believe that the life example of Otto von Habsburg, his personality, his historical religious also means that we have an obligation and a possibility. What that means is that the Habsburg royal family, the Habsburg family, is not only and exclusively an integral part of history, but also that the Habsburg family is also very much part of the Hungarian present and of the Hungarian future. And I would like to take on the opportunity that Habsburg Edward in Rome, in the Eternal City, and George Habsburg serves in Paris as a diplomat, the Hungarian nation. I would like to thank them very much for their service, and thank you very much for listening to me. thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister for his words. I would just like to add to all that the Foundation in its day-to-day work naturally is very, very grateful for the state support that we are subject to. Zsolt, your presence is very important and proves your personal commitment as well. And we would also like to thank the family very much for paying special attention to this work. George Habsburg is keeping an eye on all that from Paris, but he does keep an eye on all that. And clearly, the curatorship of the foundation also makes sure that it should not just be about paying attention, but that ultimately the foundation could be a place that can continuously and does continuously count on all the documents that are around the world and relate to Otto von Habsburg and actually by all means the contribute and add to the Hungarian historical thinking and treasures. And actually already the Chief Mufti indicated that he would like to say a few words. I would just like to give him the floor to share his thoughts with us. So feel free to come up here to the pulpit. The floor is yours.
Dame i gospodo, dozvolite mi da u ime Islamske zajednice u Bosni i Hercegovini, direktoru fondacije,
Dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Muslim community, I would like to give on behalf of our community to the head of the foundation, Mr. Pröhle. I would like to hand over something with regard to the fact that he visited us many times in Sarajevo. I would like to thank him for his invitation, and I greatly hope that the foundation will be a place for fruitful cooperation in the future as well. So I would like to ask Mr. Pröhle, please, to come here. Well, this is a very nice gesture, and thank you very much to the Mufti for his gesture. And I don't consider it my private gift. It's a classic Sarajevo copper set of coffee cups and mugs. So I think that this is the place for me to thank you very much for that. We will use it for building up our network even more on behalf of the foundation. And I would like to also thank the cooperation of my colleagues in creating this conference. I would also like to thank for the cooperation of the interpreters, and I would like to thank again the hospitality of the Pannonhalma Archbishopry, and I don't mean it as a threat, but we are relying on your hospitality in the future as well. What is it I could possibly say? Of course, I would like to say God bless the memory of Otto von Habsburg, his life and his old age already. In the moment of his death, Oli made us feel very grateful. I believe that if he sees us as a community from above, he will be not only be happy when we are actually having coffee from the Sarajevo copper set, but if we also have lunch together now. Thank you very much.